Andrew Tate, the self-described misogynist and social media personality, is reportedly still sending tweets from his prison cell in Bucharest, Romania. A Romanian court has rejected Tate's appeal against his detention, ruling that the former kickboxer must remain in custody while an organized crime investigation continues. The controversial influencer who was arrested last month is facing charges of rape and human trafficking, charges he denies. But the broader question is, why does his male supremacy views, which actively promote violence against women, attract millions of followers? Joining me now is Annette Young, the host of France 24's 51% show about women. Hello to you, Annette. Andrew Tate, I was ignorant about him until his arrest, but it turns out I'm in the minority. This man has millions of fans online. What's driving it?
Well, exactly that. I mean, that's the big question. But first of all, let's go back a step, because you and me are not alone, because I think up until relatively recently, we're like, who is Andrew Tate? So let me just recap for the viewer. He was born in the US and raised in the UK. He's a professional kickboxer, but became famous after he was kicked off the UK reality show Big Brother back in 2016 after he kicked a woman. He then went on to become a social media influencer who regularly sprouted misogynistic, sexist, bigoted, and overall incredibly harmful viewpoints. He would say things like a woman is a man's property, that they can't do jobs as well as men, that they belong at home, that rape victims should hold responsibility for their attacks, and that seeking out 18-year-old virgins is important because they are, quote, fresh. Now, he was banned from Twitter from saying that women should bear responsibility for their sexual assaults. His account, however, was later reinstated. But he then went on to be banned from YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and so on, with TikTok actually citing misogyny. So, despite all of that, his following continued to increase. And why? Some may argue that it's a pushback against feminism. But given how little women's rights have actually progressed, well, let's just take into account the gender pay gap, which still exists in this country, around 16%. Let's look at the global pandemic of violence against women, and so on. The sad reality is that we're still living in a world where it's far from being gender equal. Feminism is certainly not as influential as Tate and his followers would like to believe. The interesting thing is The Guardian has been following this story closely because a number of his followers are young men and boys. So they went out to speak to teachers who say that their students, their male students, are very much sucked in by this very ultra-glamorous world that Andrew Tate purports to be living, expensive cars.
Very macho as well.
Very macho, glamorous, sort of James Bond-esque. And his emphasis on fitness goes down well. But as one teacher points out, the reality is that Tate's influence is grooming on a massive scale.
And so a sad reality, which brings up a relevant question. How can men become allies in the push for equality?
Well, this is where I'm going to leave it to our guest for this week, Sophie Gallagher, the UK author of How Men Can Help, to explain. Let's take a listen to what she has to say.
So I think the first thing would just be to accept that this is a really widespread problem, and it is a gendered problem. Yes, there is violence against men as well, but the majority of that is also perpetrated by men. This is a gendered problem. It's really widespread. Secondly, to look introspectively and to see how we can all contribute. All of us can contribute to women being treated as second-class citizens, or violence against women being normalised, the jokes we make, the media and the culture that we buy into. How are we helping to perpetrate that as well? And then thirdly, to call it out. This is really difficult. I understand it can be awkward, it can be difficult, but I think we need to reframe that calling out as something that is a quality of leaders, men who stand up. That's a really difficult thing to do. It's not a quality of losers or people who are making things awkward. It's a really admirable thing for men to be able to stand up among friends, among family, and say, you know what, you shouldn't have said that, or you know what, here's why what you've just said is incorrect. So 3 things: understand the scale of the problem, see that we might be part of it, and then start to try and do something about it by calling it out.
So a very relevant, timely topic, Annette. But we've seen pushback, the use of tags such as hashtag not all men and the rise of influencers such as Andrew Tate and other self-proclaimed misogynists. How do you get men, especially young men, to engage?
It is really hard, but it's a case of how do you get men to realise to begin with that their view of the world is completely different to others? How can you get men to understand that every woman in every waking minute of her life is at some point having to navigate unsafe spaces? I mean, we've all heard the advice that women get, for instance, when they go out at night, don't walk by yourself down a street, perhaps have your car keys in your hand as you head towards your car in case something happens. Just be constantly on alert and basically always work along the lines that you don't want to attract threatening behaviour. I mean, again, on public transport, we all know to avert our gaze if we sense that someone is looking at us in an uncomfortable fashion. And of course, another thing that comes along with that is if men witness that, what do? Well, there's a big current campaign in the UK pushing for men to actually participate, step forward and intervene and make it very clear that whoever is the man behind that threatening behaviour is made clear that that's just not on. So, the reality is this is my life, this is the life of our wives, our sisters, our daughters, our, female colleagues. Just a case in point is the fact that after I finish coming off air from this, there will be some sort of online reaction inevitably. You only have to look at the 51% YouTube page and just scroll down the comments below and see some of the horrific statements that are made by, obviously, sadly, in most cases men, and they're said without any impudence, and it's just accepted that it's okay to say that sort of stuff. I think the reality is, as Sophie Gallagher says in her book, for those who cling tightly to the phrase, oh, boys will be boys, well, what you're doing is you're setting the bar very low for all men and all boys. Real change is going to happen when all of us, men, women, whoever, recognise that the vast, overwhelming majority of attacks carried out, of violence that is, are carried out by men, even against other men. And as a result, this is a critical issue that we as a society need to address. And when we all get on board, then everybody, and I really stress that, everybody stands to benefit.
Indeed, be the change you want to see. Thank you very much, Annette. Annette Young from the 51%. You can see that episode on air at 4:45 p.m. Paris time or 14:45 GMT later today here on France 24 and, of course, on our website.